If you spend any time observing modern political debates, you've likely heard warnings about postmodern neo-Marxism capturing our universities. Jordan Peterson has built a massive audience, sounding the alarm that the foundations of Western culture are being dismantled from the inside by ideological possession. These viral lectures represent the current edge of a 70-year philosophical project. The specific rhetoric of institutional hijacking follows a blueprint drafted long before the arrival of the internet algorithm. To understand where it comes from, we have to look back to the early 1950s. At the time, the intellectual landscape of the United States was entirely dominated by what was called the liberal consensus. Academics like Lionel Trilling noted that liberalism was the sole intellectual tradition in circulation. Conservative thought existed as a collection of fragmented, irritable mental gestures, pushed out to the extreme margins of society. That absolute consensus cracked with a 25-year-old recent graduate named William F. Buckley, Jr. In his 1951 book, God and Man at Yale, Buckley launched a scathing indictment against his own alma mater. He argued that the university had abandoned its Christian and free enterprise foundations. Instead of pursuing objective truth, Buckley claimed professors used the concept of academic freedom as a shield to indoctrinate students into secular collectivism, deliberately severing them from the values of the parents and alumni who funded the school. Buckley needed an institutional anchor to fight back. In 1955, he founded the magazine National Review. The publication's explicit mission statement declared that it stood athwart history, yelling "Stop," at a time when the broader culture appeared obsessed with what Buckley called modish fads and fallacies. To build a viable opposition, Buckley and his editors developed a strategy called fusionism. They took disparate, isolated factions, traditionalists who sought to preserve moral order, libertarians who advocated for free markets, and anti-communists, and convinced them to lock together against the liberal orthodoxy. Buckley took a scattered set of grievances and built a unified, respectable platform. By defining the boundaries of modern conservative thought, he provided the institutional foundation for the movement's growth. By the 1970s, this institutional resistance evolved into a sweeping sociological diagnosis. The key figure in this shift was Irving Kristol. He looked at the cultural upheavals of the 1960s and identified a cultural threat stemming from a specific intellectual demographic. Kristol popularized the term adversary culture. He observed a growing class of intellectuals, media figures, and university professors, a new clerisy, hostile to the bourgeois civilization they lived within. Kristol argued the education system actively trained students to hold a lower opinion of their social and economic order by the time they graduated. Kristol noted that this new class felt a natural contempt for everyday commercial activity. They viewed the free market and traditional family structures as vulgar, believing that bourgeois society tended to coarsen the human spirit. This anxiety over American education reached a boiling point in 1987. Philosopher Alan Bloom published a surprise bestseller titled The Closing of the American Mind. Bloom identified a paradox on college campuses. Universities aggressively taught that all truths are relative, and holding firm convictions was a sign of prejudice. By demanding absolute openness and treating all values as equal, higher education had paradoxically closed students' minds. If there is no objective truth to pursue, the motivation to engage in rigorous critical thought disappears. He warned that abandoning the great books of the Western Terran, texts meant to teach human excellence, meant universities were impoverishing the souls of their students. Without a firm grounding in these classical foundations, a generation was being left vulnerable to intellectual apathy and nihilism. For decades, these arguments circulated through magazines, academic texts, and sociological essays. Eventually, the theories constructed by Buckley, Kristol, and Bloom were operationalized for a mainstream political audience. At the 1992 Republican National Convention, commentator Pat Buchanan delivered a primetime address that stripped away the academic jargon. He declared to the cameras, "There is a religious war going on in our country for the soul of America. It is a cultural war." Buchanan's address signaled the completion of this intellectual architecture. The conservative cultural critique had transitioned from a localized academic grievance into the central organizing principle of American right-wing politics, which brings us back to today and to figures like Jordan Peterson. When Peterson speaks out against the ideological capture of institutions, he is operating as the modern avatar of this established lineage. His warnings of postmodern neo-Marxists echo the adversary culture Irving Kristol diagnosed in the 70s. His defense of objective truth mirrors Alan Bloom in 1987, and his grievance against universities severing students from traditional values follows William F. Buckley Jr.'s exact argument in 1951. Across 70 years, the diagnosis of the threat has remained consistent, and so has the cure. The project continuously calls individuals back to fixed anchors, specifically Judeo-Christian values and the rigor of the Western canon. Against the forces of social engineering and moral relativism, this intellectual tradition offers one primary defense mechanism: radical personal responsibility. It demands that the individual cultivate their own moral character as a bulwark against a culture they view as collapsing. The culture war is a unified metapolitical struggle over who defines truth and excellence. The digital voices dominating our feeds today haven't invented a new conflict. They have simply taken the baton that Buckley held out in 1955.